I was interested. I was at a SDN event in France earlier this year, and was surprised, or maybe I shouldn't have been, that one of the speakers who got up for Orange, who I think was in charge of one of your cloud proofs of concept, seemed to be about sort of 16 years old. She stood up, and we talked about the changes around the workforce, etc. I mean, are you seeing that you're really kind of hiring some new talent there, and they have completely different skills to what some of the guys have currently? How is that sort of change of workforce happening at Orange?
In fact, we have different challenges on the network side. One, and that links a bit to the comment from Bengt, we will have, and especially in France, we will have a decrease in the workforce. That will be natural decrease because people retiring, but that will be more on the access technology. So this is really an issue for access, and especially in France, we have a huge customer base still on PSTN. We still have a lot of equipment, teams to operate that. So this is something we are addressing, but this is not at all linked to NFV SDN. And that is completely linked to the access because we have millions of lines and millions of customers. On SDN NFV, on the contrary, on network side, our challenge is to get the competencies, and that will imply some hiring and also training of people that already working in the network teams. But the real challenge is a change in the mindset because all the processes, the tools, the way of working are completely different on the networks and on the IT side. And that was already mentioned already. Things like DevOps is something that our colleagues from IT are putting in place. And to be honest, I do not even really know what that means because on the networks, I have never had to look at that. We have processes that are totally not incompatible, but fully different, and we'll have a huge work to do to align the processes that of the IT teams and the network teams. And for example, on the network side, we still are in the mindset from what I would call the old days, that the manufacturer develop a product which is hardware-based. We still have in our own mindset that networks equipment are based on hardware, and this is and that becomes at the end quite easy to manage because at the end you always have a box, and then there is a bit of software, but it's basically a box, and that will change a lot.
Neil, perhaps you may want to talk about sort of the workforce transformation that's happening at BT.
Yeah, I think we probably face similar challenges to my colleague here in Orange, but I think I think anyone who thinks there's not a skills shortage really doesn't understand where our skills are. And here in the UK, actually BT, we're sponsoring actually the curriculum at schools level and actually going into the communities to generate the right type of skills that we need. And I think in the UK in particular, I don't think we've done enough of that. And through a number of initiatives, BT are engaged in that. We've helped with define some of the curriculum through BT Labs at Astral Park to try and ensure the skills are there. But if you go out and try and, I mean, it kind of reminds me of 10 years ago trying to hire an MPLS expert. Well, they just didn't exist because it was a new technology. We've got to take the engineers that show interest and kind of almost a cunning way of deploying these solutions. I think that the key thing we have to do is enable them. If I look back at the network and when a technology like MPLS was deployed, actually the IP network and the systems and the usage of it was very different. Now it's the internet IP networks are business critical, so there's a different level of ability for people to learn and grow and actually make mistakes, because largely people need to make mistakes to learn. So I think how we create those sandpits for our engineers to learn is going to be very important, and building the curriculum and courses to take them to where we need them to be. But there absolutely is a shortage, and I think at the moment it feels like we're fighting over kind of 50 or 60 experts who are all getting very rich, but largely our business can't afford that. So we need to invest in training and skills, absolutely.
So does that therefore mean that you're having to upskill maybe more than you maybe would have planned for originally, or?
I kind of think upskill. I mean, good engineers like to learn and build things. A good engineer will learn this, frankly. I think when it comes to the operational side and, you know, what does a field guy have to fix on a virtualized machine? Yes, we will have to upskill, but largely, you know, some of the tasks are very similar, you know, and actually also approaches in architecture. We have a concept right now where, rather than, you know, if you imagine a guy trying to, my example earlier where a guy's trying to find the virtual machine that doesn't work, if you imagine, actually, let's just have a different container full of machines. Don't touch the machines, just change the container and move everything, you know, lock, stock and barrel to a new environment, rather than risk, you know, someone touching that environment, which, you know, if you think about what my colleague just said from Orange and where this is going, you know, the slightest, you're going to walk into the network of the future where everything looks pretty much the same. You know, today, if you look in one of our exchanges, every cabinet's slightly different. Ensuring that you're working on the right piece of equipment with the right level of knowledge is going to be really important, and marrying up today's processes with the requirements of the future is one of the key barriers, and I absolutely agree. It's about mindset and changing the mindset. The rest will come by default, in my mind.
Yves, again, you mentioned the evolution of the relationship between yourselves and your vendors. Again, you sort of said you rely on one main one, I think, in France. How is that changing? I mean, is it just going to be a fact that you're going to just, you know, use more vendors than you have? Talk to me a little bit about how that sort of transformation is happening.
My first reaction would be that's not an issue for me. Basically, I don't care that much. We have vendors today. There will be vendors tomorrow. Some new might come. Some existing will still be there. As long as we have enough number of suppliers competing between themselves, innovating and providing features that are interoperable and we can integrate, then that's enough for me. One thing maybe to add is there are some requirements that exist today that they will not disappear with NFV. The requirements on resilience, they are not easy to fulfill today. They will not be easy to fulfill tomorrow. So whether these are new or not new suppliers, I do not believe in things that will be that much easy and simple to develop. So I expect that developing the virtualized functions and developing the orchestrator, all that will still remain quite complex and very, very highly skilled because we still have very high requirements.
Mervyn, yeah, absolutely. We'll bring you in there, yeah.
You know, the vendor community, I think, also have a responsibility to help you guys with some of this stuff. And I'm thinking probably along a couple of areas, tool sets. So thinking about, well, okay, you know, seeing as that you're working with our friend Spirant here in the audience on a VNF test application, to think about, well, you know, as you're de-skilling and reskilling your workforce and doing fault finding, etc., is there new sets of tools that you bring to market to help you do that and make that, okay, as Neil said, a good engineer is a good engineer. He fault find today in hardware, he fault find tomorrow in software. He still needs a set of tools to do that and to, you know, do his job. And I guess the second part, interesting around the vendor one, had a good discussion on this a couple of weeks back around the concept, particularly big guys like you two guys, tend not to want to deal with multiple little vendors. And in the past, you've come along to people like us and said, really like that little vendor over there with that little box, what can you do for me? Can they supply through you or whatever? And I think you'll see the same methodology, particularly in NFV. You know, maybe the concept of things like app markets or app stores where, you know, it allows that innovative small company to come up with something really useful, but you guys don't have to spend weeks type approving it and putting contracts in place with them and anyone else. Someone else will do that for you, and you can go through them and get it deployed.
Jack, perhaps you come in. I mean, someone earlier was talking about, you know, the ability to provide differentiation with these two technologies. Can the vendor community, can they provide that differentiation, or is it a bit more like Yves was saying, you know, they don't really care, it's all kind of roughly similar?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that's certainly one that we struggle with as vendors. I personally think it's difficult, for a vendor to sustain a technological differentiation. You'll have a release that will leapfrog you, and then there'll be another leapfrogging. Our approach in this market really is to differentiate on a couple of areas. I think Mervyn touched on one, enable, put the tools in to enable automation. The other one is around the relationship, in understanding and helping solve business problems and sharing in a risk. And the third area is around co-development, right? And we've engaged a lot with the web companies in this area around, taking our products, opening up the APIs, and working with them on a development basis to create new services and test new things out. And those are some of the areas. And other things that we've done is, started to run, open up our labs to run things like hackathons, where we work with local universities to bring in young students. And our carrier customers have done this with Comcast and AT&T in the U.S. We'd like to extend that out to Europe. So those are the areas, when I say differentiating on a relationship, that we really want to start to bring to bear. Not to mention, having best-in-breed product, right? And maintaining our Silicon Valley heritage. But that's not, in my opinion, a sustainable long-term differentiation where I think a relationship is.
Let's open up to the audience. Anyone got any questions for any of our panelists? Yeah, just wait for the microphone to come in.
Martin Geddes. How confident are you of being able to isolate performance issues and find faults in these complex virtual environments, particularly when networks are being stressed?
Is that to anyone in particular? Or?
Probably for the operators first, and they'll be interested to hear the vendor response.
Frankly, not very. And I think it's one of the key barriers. But I'd also argue that largely we haven't done a great job of that historically. If you ask us, if we have you look at the release notes or product spec for a box, how many packets per second, and there's always this big thing at the end of it called an asterisk. And then right down at the bottom there's this kind of hyperbole that says, we're not quite sure really. And I think the same thing applies. So I actually think very little is going to change in that. I think the difference with perhaps with NFV and SDN is when you do run out of performance, is it easier to press a button and elastically add more capability? And actually, my concern on that is okay, what does our true unit cost now start to look like? But I would largely say we've never really done a great job of that in the IT networking space ever. And we know when we've run out of capacity because we're running around like headless chickens trying to fix it. And we've got better at predicting it, we've got better at testing it, but often we still catch ourselves out. My big concern on the SDN side is we treat the control plane with kid gloves. We're really careful not to mess it up. SDN, I think, in some ways makes it easier for you to mess it up. And no control plane means no dial tone, it means no internet, it means largely nothing. And if you look at every big network outage in the world ever, control planes always played a key part in it, and not managing that effectively enough.
Yeah, not much to add.
I can give you a sort of little bit of vendor viewpoint. So I guess firstly, let's remember that we sort of separate hardware and software in this conversation, and you go, yeah, there's no such a thing as pure hardware. All hardware boxes out there have loads of lines of software actually controlling them and running them today. And there's extensive testing that goes on in that. Now, for me, the interesting question is what's the right balance between testing it to death in labs before you deploy anything ever versus, I think, something Jack talked about earlier, the concept of experimenting, or even try before you buy that Neil mentioned. Sort of going, okay, where's the right balance there of, it has to be ultra rock solid, ultra high quality, versus a little bit of, I'll give it to a few friendly customers, maybe a little bit cheaper, and let them play with it as a beta trial and see what happens. And getting those two, I'm not quite sure where that balance is, but there's a balance to be drawn in there, I think, it's not all one or the other.
And that's, I guess, that sort of cultural change that needs to happen for the operators to sort of think that they can do that.
Yeah, it's a bit scary.
It's good.
But I'd argue that we're doing that already. I mean, we talked about proof of concept. We were on a proof of concept with one of the largest banks in the world that's typically risk averse. But they themselves recognise the need that unless they do experimentation, then largely the world they live in will stay the same. So I think doing proof of concept with customers in a safe environment and in creating that environment, and us as kind of the managers of this scenario have to make sure that environment is safe and controlled and the risks are recognised. I think, every customer I talk to wants to do some sort of proof of concept. My challenge is how can we react to that and make it almost effective to do that for them and for us.
And what's sort of holding you back from just rolling out loads of these kind of beta type trials? What's the biggest?
I think it's largely space to think and bandwidth. It's doing a proof of concept is a resource heavy. You've got to have people on the ground to build it, to test it, to generate results, to try to kind of connect it and try something different. And we're all busy trying to both kind of operator, vendor, and customer. We're all trying to run our own businesses at the same time. But if I look back on my experience, pretty much all of the strongest products I've ever launched started with a conversation with a customer. That for me says that we have to do that experimentation more than ever now.
Jack, that was experimentation was one of the things that you picked up on. Is that music to your ears, or should they be doing a lot more?
No, I think that's the way to go. I do acknowledge it's resource intensive, and that's again where vendors and suppliers can help. The only thing I'll add to the previous conversation is as these networks become more complex, I think you start to move into a realm of big data analytics, right? In terms of looking across, whether it's a server issue, whether it's a network issue, whether it's a network function issue, whether it's a controller issue, right? All of these things are going to get up, basically pushed up to a big analytics engine in the cloud eventually. Be interested in your views on that, but I think that's the way to start to solve some of these performance issues and to know if your experiments are starting to work correctly or not, right? Because there's just so much more complexity now. And this whole S&P trap, approach, I think is just going to start to collapse over time. So I think that's something we've been looking at and be interested in any kind of views on that. I'm happy to talk offline about that as well.
Eve, did you ever? Yeah.
Yes, I agree. One difficulty we have is the increase in complexity and the speed of change. Yeah. So we have from time to time, as everyone, some behaviors in the network that we do not really like, even if there is no impact on the customers. And when we make the analysis, we see that in fact, even the standards change so fast, and we introduce new functions. And at the end, it's always something coming from the control plane, but there is an effect on one aspect that can be the mobile packet core, and then it goes to the HRR, and then it goes into the network. And at the end, it's very, very difficult to really track what was the root cause, and we still learn quite a lot. I fully agree that big data analytics will help. The only thing is, my feeling today is we are very at the early beginning of using big data for network management. So this is something that we have identified, but we still have a lot to do, I would say, as an industry globally, to really develop the tools to have big data analytics used for network management. Today we have a lot of different tools from probes, network elements, and so on, but each one is isolated. We have very good management of a single function of equipment today, but the overall picture is still difficult to aggregate.
Any more questions? Yeah.
I think this has to be for Bengt because he hasn't answered any questions yet. But I'd be keen to hear other people's answers. Sorry, it's Chris Bierst from Colliago. Just in terms of organizational transformation, traditionally the CTO's had the network, the CIO has had BSS and all the IT functions. What do you think this is going to do in terms of those two functions? Is this going to bring them together, or what do you think?
Yes, but it will take a very long time. In a simplified way, you can say that we get a software-centric network is just a natural evolution. It would be very strange if we didn't have that. So it just, I think, part of this seminar has been addressing how complex it is to arrive to that situation. So it's a remote goal, but then I think we are beyond 5 and 7 years in a very distant future. Commenting just on a few of the discussion here, I agree with Yves and Neil that you need different skills than you have today in the engineering teams, but I also believe that, just as Neil pointing out, engineers are very keen to learn new things. So I think it's really manageable. And I would also say that that is not the biggest cost problem we have in the operator side of the business. There are, all the other sides, particularly on legacy IT. The reason why IT spend is surpassing telecom spend at operators is not a strategic investment in IT for operators. It's because you have so much legacy system integration costs that you're just carrying with you. So particularly the IT side is a big cost item. We also find, I think was one of my slides covered that this is also putting very different skills needs on sourcing at operators. We've been, the advantage of buying Cisco and Ericsson and Huawei boxes is that they have a price tag, and what you get the box for a certain price. This is a different way of sourcing. You can, on one level, talk about simplified data plane products, but who provides the orchestration or controlling plane, and how do you price that? And that, I don't think those skills doesn't exist currently at operators, in my opinion.
Yeah, Justin at the back.
I'll just add in BT we only have a CIO, and we all work for him. Just having anyone who lives in the world of those two departments being separate, you're missing out. Is I think bring them together. Yeah, it's painful, but actually you need to do it. And also on the kind of engineer and operations side, that's all part of one team in BT called TSO. And we really see in our research group are in there, we really see a massive benefit from doing that and bringing that community much closer together.
Thank you. Yeah.
Justin Paul from Amdocs again. Linking to the theme of transformation, I guess is a question to Yves and Neil. We talked about I wanted to ask about the retention challenges. And certainly in our industry, what we find as a software company is when you have something new and shiny, new language, a new technology, all the best and the brightest want to go and work on that. But of course, the challenge for you is a lot of the revenue today, all the revenue today comes from your legacy networks. How are you going to manage that operational challenge of the good people all wanting to go and work on the new stuff, but the old stuff being what generates the cash today?
I think the bathtub curve applies. So you need your good people to get it up and running. When it's up and running, you've fixed all the bugs, it largely takes care of itself. So you can then redeploy your guys onto the next bathtub. I think the ongoing challenge is maintaining and operationalizing and improving. Quite often you launch a service and you leave it forever, when actually there's still quite a lot of inefficiency in it. So I think that I don't think that's a big issue. And actually, you want your greatest thinkers working on the newest things that are going to bring revenue for the future, in my mind.
Yes, I don't see any real difficulty for that. In fact, we have a lot of transformation ongoing. NFV is one of them. Access is moving to very higher broadband. We have big data. We have a lot of things to work on and to provide nice topics and projects for a lot of people. And the issue on legacy is not that much of retaining capabilities, because in fact legacy, both technologies offers, there is no really need to have new development on these ones. The issue is more how to get rid of these legacy, both the offers and the technologies. And that is something we also need to work on. We have no issue on getting the capabilities on that, but to keep focus on getting rid of everything that is old. And one difficulty we have is that the cost of keeping these old technologies and offers and technologies both on network and IT, we have great difficulties to really identify all the costs that have. And for example, we develop, we have the example that is quite obvious of PSTN. The IT for PSTN does not move, except that from time to time we need to keep some compatibility, and that type of cost is very, very difficult to really identify and to put into a business case. And this is what we need to improve.
Yeah, just one comment here. I think if you look at the industry development over the last maybe 10, 15 years or so, I would say that the supply side of the business has been far more successful in moving out cost of their business than operators have. And that's partly because of the competitive environment the vendors are playing in. If you take something like Nokia and Symbian had 7,500 employees or something, and suddenly comes Android, and with 60 people you can do the same job, and then that operating system disappears from the industry. That kind of disruption can never happen in the operator industry, because you are all legacy players, and no one, even if you had a new player and you gave that player spectrum and you gave them equipment, they would still not be successful, because their starting point would be 0 customers, and they would need to subsidize and pay a lot of commissions to get customers. So you never have that sort of disruptive events between operators. I think the most disruptive event for operators is that their IT peers and suppliers have software enabled their business much faster. If you take someone like Microsoft, who we are all using, first of all, they have been able to maintain their presence in the enterprise business over a 20-year period. I mean, they have challengers, but they are still dominating. 15 years ago, we got hardware or CDs to install the software. Today, that's a completely cloudified business. The IT suppliers, sort of smaller players that served them before are disappearing, because they have completely cloudified their business. And I think that is maybe the most disruptive thing that is happening to operators, not between them, but what their IT-based suppliers are able to do. And I think that will be more and more seen particularly in the enterprise business, of who is providing the communication services to enterprises. Is it the operators, or is it players like Microsoft?
Okay. Ben, I know you talked about in your presentation about this kind of mainly in the main being a tier 1 operator play. I was going to ask sort of maybe Mervyn and Jack, are there any examples that you guys are working with maybe some of the smaller operators? Is anyone kind of doing anything kind of interesting or in the SDN NFV space?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely not just a tier 1 play. What you'll find, like any other technologies, is you'll find some of the tier 2, tier 3 being smaller can be more agile. If you excuse the pun, since we use agility a lot these days, but they can move faster, let's say. So yeah, it absolutely applies across the domains. And I guess both from the point of view of their internal network, which I think we've talked a lot about this morning, and how you can optimize your own network, but also the managed services play. Just touched a moment ago on who supplies the services to the enterprises. I think many service providers today provide connectivity type services out there, and the IT supplied by someone else. You go, right, well, if I can put, you know, IT type of services on a virtual application on the CPE, I can upsell. And yes, it might, from the IT guy point of view, it might not be extra budget, but I can steal money from someone else. And I can actively compete with some of those guys like Amazon or Microsoft or whatever. Maybe I'm using their products, maybe I'm competing against them, but it opens up a whole new revenue stream there for the service provider as a managed offering. I think that's where a lot of the tier 2, tier 3 guys that you see this initially. They sort of go, I don't have as big a network and maybe I don't have as big legacy problems because I haven't been in as long as an existence as the big guys. But yeah, I can go out and compete quickly. And you know, it's not that different to, you know, what we've seen with mobile services in the last 2 years. You know, who were the first to launch 3G? It wasn't the big guys, but when the big guys came to market, they came to market hard. So, you know, I think you probably see something similar here.
Jack?
Well, certainly I agree. It's definitely not just a tier 1, tier 2 play. Thanks. I think the big target for the smaller guys is the business customer, and in particular, small, medium business. Also see potential, well, you know, I don't know how it relates, but if you look at, like, NTT acquired a company called Vertella, if you're probably familiar with, and I think that was for the very reason that I think they view these smaller tier 2 players, or, you know, Vertella is quite small actually, as being more agile and allows them to kind of get out to market quickly with these services. So, you know, I see a big play in certainly the small, medium business market, and rolling these out more quickly, and potentially some acquisitions, you know, through that process of these smaller players.
Okay. Any more questions? Do you want to just wait for that?
Sorry, just as a comment in terms of who's doing this stuff, Telekom Austria is doing a lot, and they of course have quite small markets in Eastern Europe and places like Serbia and Slovenia. And they're using those a bit like Orange Moldova in terms of test beds for this. So I think there's quite a lot going on out there when you talk to people, but it's all at the same stage. It's all proof of concept and pilots. Yeah.
Virtual packet core trials and things like that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Eve, you obviously were the one sort of highlight some real sort of different proof of concepts that you're doing. 2 questions on that. First one, are what you're seeing there, is it exceeding expectations? Is it below expectations? Is it roughly giving you what you thought you would get? What's the overall view on that? And the second one is, which of those proof of concepts are you really kind of most excited about?
Wow. Well, I would say that we are on the normal hype curve. So we talked a lot, and now we are on real things. The thing where we are not that well progressed, but that's hard, and we know that's quite a long-term goal. Is really to have interoperability between different really splitting the functions, identifying what are the different functions, and having that interoperable with standardized interfaces. So that we know that is quite a long route, and but I believe we are really on the right track, and I would expect that really NFV will come really step by step, but quite soon anyway. Now, which one is the most exciting? The one aspect where we have quite a lot of not troubles, but give us a lot of work is all the area about the mobile packet core, whether it is the EPC, the IMS, the GI interface, service chaining, and so on. So in all that area, I expect the benefits will be quite easy and rapid to see. So I personally have great expectations in this area.
And Neil and maybe Eve as well. Obviously, we're seeing lots of chat around sort of consolidation in the market. Are you getting any kind of pressure at all from the top management to kind of make these things happen more quickly than you would like? Or again, is it a case of, you were saying at the beginning, you know, they don't even know what's really happening beneath the surface? Is there sort of a dynamic happening there?
I think there's always a pressure on any company to deliver, and actually I think one of the We've in BT, we've pretty much replaced all of 21C in the last 2 years, and very few people know that we've done it. But we've upgraded it. Actually working with Sienna, working with Alcatel-Lucent, and we've pretty much gone out and replaced the entire network, driven a new cost point, enable us to build a more broadband and fibre-based platform. And actually, we went. I think the world we try and operate in BT is kind of bottom up. What are the good ideas, and how do we properly articulate them and present them, so that we get buy-in from the whole group? And I think companies that embrace that are the ones that are being the most successful. So absolutely, we invest in something, we want to make a return, but also I think increasingly the business recognises we do need to try some things and get them out. But if I look back in the last couple of years from a BT perspective, we've completely replaced 21C. We've launched a TV, in fact 3 TV channels in the space of 6 or 7 months. We're launching a mobile network in the space of roughly the same time. I'm less convinced that agility is one of our key problems. I think we have bigger challenges on the legacy networks, and I absolutely agree with how do we move forward, not just from a cost point of view, but how does regulation move with us? Because I think that's potentially a barrier, potentially an enabler if we get that right. In the UK, we have an election coming up, which will no doubt add a lot of other pressures to the telecoms sector in the UK. So I think pressure is there, but I think it's good to have that pressure, because I think we need to be valuable and deliver things.
Eve?
And maybe just to add, we see that's quite important to be on the right track and to start early and to analyze what will be the evolutions quite early. The real pace of evolution into the operational networks, that is much more depending on what is the real progress of the overall industry. And everyone understands that will come, that everything is not available as on day one, so that will come gradually, but we really need to anticipate, and this is what we put our efforts on.
Okay, well, we'll start to wrap up. Jack, perhaps you might want to kick us off. What, if you had like an overriding kind of message, if you like, to the industry on SDN and NFV, what would that message be?
That's a tough one.
Buy more.
Apart from buying more Jennifer stuff.
So a topic we touched on a little bit, which is kind of near and dear to my heart, is the business case, right? And I think that's an area that, I think we need to explore more, because as a management accountant, right, there are different definitions. So people use terms like CapEx, OpEx very interchangeably. But really what you want to look at is just long, and you want to look at the timing, of these things. So I would be very careful in terms of articulating short-term versus long-term business cases, CapEx versus OpEx. Most companies, at least at a strategic level, will allocate CapEx, over a period of time at the beginning of the year, and they can cut that spend any time. They're not obligated to spend that, and they have, right? So, and we've felt the pain as a result of that. But the CapEx is invested for purposes of either reducing operating leverage, reducing the cost of running the network, or creating new business models. And that's another area I think that we need to explore and be complementary in terms of the transformation, because I really think they go hand in hand. And that's an area that we've looked at quite a bit. So, I mean, one of the things is just to kind of make sure that you have this long-term, financial view, this transformation of the finances. And, what are the steps to get there? I wouldn't spend years trying to articulate a business case, but just, get some rough ballparks in terms of what you want to accomplish as you go through some of these trials as well.
Okay. Bent?
Yeah. I think, we have very good reasons to be excited about the software evolution of our networks. It's a very good thing. It's very natural. It will, as we have heard from all speakers today, that it will take some time, because there is also a meaning in carrier grade. We need robustness in what we're delivering to both enterprise and consumers, and therefore I think it will be a process to get there. And then, I hate to bore you with this message again, but in the overall perspective of an operator business, it really needs to go hand in hand with extensive transformation of operator business. And that can actually happen with or without SDN, but it's very important that for really getting the benefits, that it's part of that evolution.
Okay. Maybe I'm going to come to you last, if that's all right, for reasons that become obvious. Eve, tell us, your peers out there in the industry who want to, learn from one of the biggest operators out there. What would be your message to them about SDN and NFV? What would be the key point you want to get across, I guess, from what you've learned so far?
Well, in terms of message, in fact, we that's obvious. We have no doubt. So my message would be, let's work together as an industry in TMF, in NFV. We need to progress on having SDN and NFV standardized, because this is what will help it develop in our business, which is a business of competition with interoperability and global solutions based on bricks coming from different suppliers. So we need to continue that. That has been basically the roots of telecom since more than a century, to keep that this principle and that mindset into SDN and NFV. So let's do it.
Yeah, I kind of echo that, but also I think I would one caution I was going to mention, actually, just even before you said that, I think the standards bodies are getting out of control. We have too many of them, and they take way too long. And we used to have a world where you build something, then standardize it. Now we have a period where we argue for what seems to be forever. We agree on something that's frankly rubbish, and then we productize it. I would challenge everyone, let's get the concepts built, turn up with a code or the box that actually works, then we'll standardize it. I think it's a big barrier for productivity in our industry, and largely we can't afford it. That would be one thing I'd say. I think the second thing is really be sure that you understand the problem you're trying to solve. Quite often I sit in presentations about SDN and NFV, and it feels like a cure looking for a disease. What really are we fixing? What really is the thing that's going to be brilliant about this? Because I think there's some really great solutions that this will help with, but there's also a lot of wacky ones. Like I saw one on Wi-Fi that just made me want to pull my eyes out. It was just horrific in trying to deploy it. And the benefits were just, great. I can Wi-Fi whilst I wait for my coffee to be delivered. Well, you can do that now. So, be really clear about what the benefits are and how this is going to, we talk about transformation. Is it really transformational, or is it just a couple of nickel and dimes on top of what we're already doing? That would be my message.
Thank you very much. Mo.
Okay, so yeah, I guess building a little bit on Neil's theme there, being marketing, I attend a lot of events over the course of, I guess, the last 18 months. And I've seen this subject, only 18 months ago, or maybe even a year ago, be exactly as Neil described it. The answer is SDN and NFV. What was the question? And it'll make your toast and drive your car for you and anything else you've ever thought of, ever. What I've seen in the last sort of 3 to 6 months is a much more practical approach to, okay, what's it for, how will it add benefit to me, and how am I going to make money out of it, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And I think the industry, I've seen a clear change in the industry from, that hype cycle, from, at the top of the hype cycle, do everything. Hopefully we can actually avoid the trough of disillusionment. And, we're already doing serious POGs. I mean, the guys in Orange, Neil said about his POG that he mentioned with the finance community, which is probably, a very, very serious pre-deployment POG. I'm going, okay, that's real uses for the real world. So I think, we're absolutely doing the right thing, and now the wider community are involved, asking the right questions. So for me, it's just, keep going down that route. Keep looking for what the right deployment, practical answer is, and let's go do it.